In the lower archives of the Istanbul Museum of the Ancient Orient, inside a collection that most visitors never see, there is a drawer. The drawer is part of a larger system. Thousands of catalog fragments pulled from the ground at Nippur over a century ago. Fired clay pressed with wedge-shaped marks, stacked and sorted and mostly forgotten. The tablet in this story came from that drawer. It is small enough to fit in one hand. Its lower right corner is gone, sheared off at some point between excavation and storage. 3 of its 4 columns are intact. The 4th is damaged beyond recovery. When it was cataloged, it was classified as an administrative fragment, a routine piece, possibly a duplicate of a known ME text. The MEs were the divine decrees of Enki, the Sumerian god of wisdom. A list of everything civilization required: weaving, law, music, the crafts, standard material, the kind of tablet that appears 10,000 times across the Nippur collection. Nobody studied it closely. There was no reason to. Then, a digital epigrapher ran an enhanced scan, and the 3rd column did not say what it was supposed to say. The first 2 columns matched: standard ME structure, known signs, expected vocabulary. The 3rd column was different, where the text should have listed something like descent into the underworld or basket weaving. It listed numbers, 3 clusters of numerical signs grouped in a way that did not match administrative counts, did not match king list dating formats, and did not match standard astronomical logs. Below the clusters, a directional phrase: Enki's southern sky band, the path of the gods in the lower heavens. And below that, a damaged sequence, the final signs of the column, partially illegible. The catalog note for that final line read simply, "Uncertain reading." That phrase, uncertain reading, appears constantly in cuneiform scholarship. The signs are damaged, the context is unclear. The parallel texts do not help, it gets marked and moved past. But this was the only sign in the entire column that no one had tried to interpret. The first 2 columns were translated. The numerical clusters were translated provisionally. The directional phrase was translated. Just that one final sequence marked uncertain and left. That is where this story begins. The ME tablets are one of the most studied categories of Sumerian text. Scholars have translated lists of them from multiple sites: Nippur, Ur, Eridu. They name things like kingship, the scribal art, the art of the smith. Some of the MEs are physical objects. Some are abstract concepts. Some are rituals. What makes them unusual is that the Sumerian texts never fully describe what the MEs looked like. They were stored in Enki's temple, the Abzu at Eridu. Inanna stole them and brought them to Uruk. The gods argued over them. They were clearly important. But no tablet has ever explained in physical terms what most of them actually were. The mainstream interpretation is that the MEs were symbolic, a catalog of cultural values, a poetic framework for understanding what made civilization possible. The list includes both a musical instrument and victory, both the descent into the underworld and truth. You cannot hold victory in your hands. So the assumption is that these were metaphors, concepts dressed as objects for the sake of the myth. That explanation has worked for decades. It is rational. It fits most of the evidence. But it does not explain why the 3rd column of this tablet listed intervals instead of concepts. The epigrapher who ran the enhanced scan pulled parallel comparisons. Similar numerical clusters came from other tablets across the Nippur collection, from Ur and from Eridu. The sign groupings used in this column appeared in 2 other contexts in the Nippur archive. One was an astronomical observation text. It recorded cycles of celestial events and intervals between appearances. The second context was different. It appeared in a class of inscriptions used for physical measurements, the dimensions of temple structures, the depth of sacred wells, and the distances between foundation stones. The sign grouping in this tablet sat somewhere between those two categories. That meant it could be ritual counting, an interval of offerings or observances, or it could be measuring something with a physical dimension. The official reading assumed the first. The measurement category was noted and set aside. Here is what made that choice difficult to accept. The tablet's directional phrase, the southern sky band and Enki's path, was mapped against the actual geography. Eridu, the oldest Sumerian city and the site of Enki's temple, sits at the southernmost edge of ancient Sumer. In Babylonian star catalogs, the region of sky governed by Enki and Ea was called the Path of Ea. It was the southernmost band of observable stars, the horizon band that only residents of the deep south could track properly. The directional phrase in the tablet was not metaphorical in origin. It referred to a real part of the sky, over a real city, in a real direction. Then the reconstruction of the damaged final signs began. Using known sign tables, one possible reading emerged, not confirmed and flagged explicitly as speculative, a phrase meaning where the signal does not leave. Alternatively, where the voice remains, or where the frequency holds. Mainstream scholars who reviewed this reconstruction translated the same signs differently, where the divine presence dwells. That is an established construction. Enki's presence dwelling in the southern waters, in the Apsu, the subterranean freshwater reservoir beneath his temple, is documented across Sumerian and Akkadian texts. The official translation was not invented. It had support. But here is the difference, the epigrapher noted. The Sumerians had multiple sign constructions for dwelling, presence, residence. The one used in this damaged line was from a different category, not the word for a god residing in a place. A word used for a condition that persists, not a being in a location. A state that continues in a location regardless of whether anything is present. The Sumerians had a word for dwelling. They had a different word for that which does not move. The sign used in column 3 was the second kind. That distinction was what pushed the inquiry further. The Era epic is a real Akkadian text, translated and studied, and it contains a line that has always been treated as lament. Marduk, the great god of Babylon, asks, "Where are the 7 sages of the Apsu?" The 7 sages, the Apkallu, were pre-flood figures in Sumerian mythology, fishman demigods sent by Enki from the subterranean waters to teach humanity civilization. They brought the arts, the crafts, the laws, the mathematics. They served as advisors to the first kings of Sumer. And then, after the flood, they were sent back. The last of them, Utuabzu, ascended to heaven. They were gone. Marduk's question in context is not simply grief. It implies that the absence of the sages has consequences, that something they maintained is no longer being maintained, that things are wrong because the sages are gone. The Nippur tablet's final legible line before the damaged break contained a verb form specific to ongoing action in Sumerian, not a completed event, not a memory of something finished, an action still in progress. The sages had departed, but the tablet did not say everything they brought with them departed too. According to one speculative interpretation, not endorsed by mainstream scholarship and flagged here clearly as an alternative reading, the fragment may record not a list of gifts given to humanity, but a description of what the Apkallu left operating when they returned to the Abzu. Not cultural knowledge, something with a direction, something pointed at the southern sky, something described with a word for a condition that persists. That interpretation has no confirmed support in mainstream cuneiform studies. The fragment is too damaged. The readings are too uncertain, but it created a specific problem: the numbers. There is a phenomenon that has been circling the earth continuously since long before the first Sumerian city was built. It requires no maintenance, it was not constructed, it cannot be switched off. It is called the Schumann resonance, and it is not a theory or a metaphor. It is measured physics, confirmed by monitoring stations on every continent, studied by NASA and geophysicists, documented in peer-reviewed literature since the 1960s. The Earth's surface and its upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, form a cavity. Lightning strikes the planet approximately 50 times per second, every second, without pause. Each strike releases electromagnetic energy that does not simply radiate outward and dissipate. It travels between the two conductive layers, the surface below and the ionosphere above, bouncing, circling, reinforcing itself. When the wave travels the full circumference of the Earth and arrives back where it started, certain wavelengths amplify. The fundamental resonant frequency of this cavity is approximately 7.83 cycles per second. The harmonics sit at roughly 14.3, 20.8, 27.3, and 33.8 cycles per second. These are not arbitrary numbers. They are determined by the physical dimensions of the Earth itself, its circumference, the height of the ionosphere, and the speed of light. Change any of those constants and the resonance changes. They are fixed by the planet. Winfried Otto Schumann predicted this mathematically in 1952. He could do so because he knew the Earth's circumference and the speed of light. The Sumerians, according to the accepted timeline of scientific history, knew neither. The disputed numerical clusters on the Nippur fragment, when treated as a cycle count rather than a ritual unit, a reading that mainstream Sumerian mathematics does not cleanly support, produce a ratio. According to one unpublished analysis cited in a footnote of a broader Nippur catalog study, as a translation note that was never formally submitted to a journal, that analysis argues the ratio mirrors the structure of the Schumann harmonic series. Mainstream scholars do not accept this comparison. The units are too ambiguous. The mathematical notation of Sumerian scribes did not work in cycles per second. The resemblance, they say, is coincidental, the kind of pattern that appears whenever someone is determined to find one. That objection is reasonable. It may be correct. But the pattern did not stop at one tablet. The Eridu temple complex is one of the oldest continuously occupied sacred sites in the world. Shrine layers at Eridu have been excavated going back to approximately 5,400 BCE. Enki's temple there, the Abzu, was built over the subterranean freshwater reservoir, the Apsu. The building sat above water. Below it was depth. In excavation records from the Eridu site, a construction tablet was documented that recorded dimensional ratios for the Abzu structure, its depth, its subterranean chamber, its orientation. The orientation was south-southwest, consistent with the directional phrase in the Nippur fragment. Different tablet, different city, same direction. And then there was the Barton cylinder. This is a real artifact, a clay cylinder in the University of Pennsylvania Museum from the Nippur collection, inscribed with a hymn to Enlil. It contains a damaged passage. The mainstream translation of that passage describes a sound from below the earth. In the context of Enki's domain, the voice of the water god in the deep Apsu, standard cosmological poetry, the sound of the divine waters. That reading is supported and accepted. The alternative reading of the same passage treats the phrase not as poetic description of a deity's voice, but as a reference to something ongoing, something located below the surface, something with a repeating character. 3 documents, an ME fragment from Nippur, listing numerical intervals and a southern bearing, a construction record from Eridu oriented toward that same bearing, and a cosmological hymn from Nippur referencing a sound from below the earth in Enki's domain. All 3 point toward the same configuration. The official interpretation of each text is individually sound. What no official interpretation addresses is why they point the same direction. Coincidence requires 3 separate scribal traditions across 3 cities to make identical poetic choices for unrelated reasons. Pattern requires 1 shared memory of something real. This is where the institutional dimension of the story becomes relevant, and it requires careful framing because it is not a conspiracy. It is something more ordinary, and in some ways more uncomfortable. The alternative translation of the Nippur fragment's 3rd column, the reading that treated the numerical clusters as resonant intervals rather than ritual counts, was prepared as a working paper by a researcher at a European university. It was not peer-reviewed. It was not formally submitted. It appeared as a footnote in a larger Nippur catalog study, described as an unpublished translation note, cited once and not followed up. Around the time that catalog study was published, the fragment itself was reclassified within the Istanbul collection. Archive reorganizations happen. They are routine. The fragment's shelf location changed. The enhanced resolution scan that the epigrapher had commissioned exists, but it has not been added to the museum's public digital catalog. The standard resolution image is available. The enhanced version, the one that made the numerical clusters legible enough for the alternative reading, is not. No one had to suppress anything. No one had to issue orders or make threats. The fragment is fragile. Archives are understaffed. Digitization takes time and resources. The paper was never formally published, so there was nothing to retract. The story of the tablet simply stopped being told, not because anyone silenced it, but because the next step was never taken. The fragment that breaks the standard ME reading is now the one that requires the most effort to find. Whether that is meaningful or incidental depends on what you think the 3rd column actually says. In Babylonian star catalogs, real texts studied and translated among the most detailed astronomical records of the ancient world, the sky was divided into 3 paths. The path of Anu ran through the middle. The path of Enlil ran through the north. The path of Ea ran through the south. The band of stars visible near the horizon from southern Mesopotamia associated with Enki, with the deep waters, with the underworld, with whatever dwelt below. Eridu sits at 30.8 degrees north latitude. It was the southernmost of the sacred cities. It was the oldest. It was built over water. It was oriented toward the southern sky. And according to one disputed reading of a tablet currently in a drawer in Istanbul, it was the location of something that did not leave when the gods did. The Schumann resonance does not have a single origin point. It is global. It is sustained by lightning strikes across the entire planet. It does not beam outward from one location. It circles. It is not a directional signal in the way a transmission would be, but the Nippur tablet in this reading does not describe where the resonance comes from. It describes a bearing, a direction, as if the important information is not the source of the frequency, but what the frequency is pointed toward. A signal without direction is background noise. A signal with a direction written down 4,000 years ago is something else. The Apkallu mythology has one detail that mainstream scholarship has never fully resolved. The last sage, Utuabzu, ascended to heaven. The others went back to the Apsu. Marduk in the Era epic asks where they are. The phrasing implies not that they are gone permanently, but that they are absent when they should not be, as if their return was expected and has not yet come. The interval phrase in the Nippur fragment, the numerical clusters that, in one unpublished translation, read as cycles of return, appears in one other context in the Sumerian record. In the king lists, a similar construction marks the gap between two eras, the time before the flood and the time after, a break in the record, a division between what was and what resumed. If that phrase is chronological in the king list, marking elapsed time, then it may be chronological in the Nippur fragment too. Elapsed time between departures and arrivals, a schedule, a window. Mainstream scholarship is clear. There is no evidence of a literal return doctrine in Sumerian religion. The Apkallu mythology is not a prophecy. It is a cosmological explanation for the origins of human knowledge. The sages came, they taught, they left. That is the complete myth. The question is not whether that reading is wrong. It may be entirely right. The question is whether the tablet's third column, the column that does not list cultural gifts, that lists intervals and a direction and a sign, meaning something that persists in place, was part of that same mythology or something adjacent to it that got filed in the wrong drawer. Schumann resonance. Monitoring is ongoing. Stations on every continent track the frequency continuously. It fluctuates slightly, correlated with solar activity, with global storm patterns, with the electromagnetic behavior of the ionosphere. The fundamental frequency is not perfectly stable, but it is always there. It has been there since Earth had an atmosphere. It will continue long after the last human institution capable of measuring it is gone. AI translation tools are now being applied to undeciphered and partially published cuneiform archives. Thousands of Nippur tablets remain unstudied in the Istanbul collection alone. New readings of damaged texts are emerging regularly, some of them revise conclusions that have stood for a century. The enhanced scan of the fragment in question still exists. At some point, it will be re-examined. Whether the third column then says what the mainstream catalog note says it says, or what the unpublished translation note says it says, is an open question. That question is why this story does not close. And it is why the tablet matters more than its catalog classification suggests. The official explanation for the Nippur fragment is complete, careful, and documented. The numerical clusters are ritual counting units or astronomical observation records. The directional phrase is standard Anki iconography. The damaged final line is uncertain but likely theological. The dwelling of the divine presence in the southern waters. Every sign is accounted for. Every reading has precedent. The tablet is one fragment of thousands, telling a version of a story that other tablets also tell. The alternative reading cannot be proven. It requires treating ambiguous signs as technical data. It requires assuming that Sumerian scribes were recording something physical rather than symbolic. It requires believing that 4,000 years ago, in a building constructed over underground water at the edge of the ancient world, someone wrote down an interval and a direction corresponding to a frequency that the Earth generates constantly and that modern physics only named 70 years ago. Neither answer is satisfying. That is the honest position. But here is what remains, regardless of translation. The Schumann resonance is real. It is running right now at this moment as it was running before the first Sumerian scribe pressed a reed into wet clay. It has never required anyone to maintain it, explain it, believe in it, or preserve it. It circles the Earth at 7.83 cycles per second, and it does not stop. It does not need a civilization to sustain it. Civilizations have risen and collapsed, and been buried and forgotten while it continued. The Apkallu taught civilization and went back into the water. The last one ascended to heaven. Marduk asked where they had gone, and somewhere in a climate-controlled drawer in Istanbul, a fired clay tablet lists a number, a direction, and a sign that means not a dwelling, but a condition that persists. If the Sumerians invented all of this, then they invented something impossibly specific. If they did not invent it, if someone at some point told them what to record and where to point, then the tablet was never a list of gifts. It was a record of something left running. And the frequency it describes has been answering ever since, circling the planet, patient and directionless to everyone who has listened, except to whoever wrote down the bearing. The drawer closes. The clay faces the dark. The frequency continues.